Class is in session, and this is part one of our Leadership Learning Lab on belief systems. I'm your hostess, Justine González, and we're going to jump right in onto ancestral belief systems. Now, to anchor us in a quote from Carl Jung, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Now, comment below if you've seen this quote before or just what's your initial reaction to this quote. And at any point, if you have something to say, please feel free to comment below. We're going to keep it moving here in this part one of the series, when enlightenment becomes colonization, examining our ancestral belief systems. Part two, when it releases, so make sure you hit subscribe and the bell to receive notifications, is going to examine our own human beliefs, opinions, thoughts, emotions, reactions, actions, and inactions through the lens of personality development. In part three, we're going to dive more into systems of power in modern day society. And then finally, in part four of our series on belief systems, we are going to examine our relationships with power via capitalism, education, religion, and other modern day institutions that we are currently being birthed into as humans. In this first part one, titled When Enlightenment Becomes Colonization, examining our ancestral belief systems, I'm going to be sharing a lot of different cited resources. So once again, feel free to share the presentation, take pictures, repost, etc., and also share your open opinions and honest thoughts below. So we're going to take it all the way back to different ancient time periods and look at some very brief snapshots to ground us in our learning and have a little bit of a comprehensive bridge to where we currently are and how we got there. And I'm going to begin with two of the oldest sciences known in the world. One is alchemy and the other is astrology. And the beginnings of both of these extend back into the obscurity of prehistoric times. So, according to the earliest records extant, alchemy and astrology were considered as divinely revealed to man so that by their aid, he might regain his lost estate. And so alchemy actually stems from the word chem or ancient chem, if you've heard of that term in Mesopotamia, but we're specifically talking about the Nile River civilizations and what would be come to known as modern day Egypt. So the civilization in Chem actually flourished for over 3,000 years, and it was spanning the pre-dynastic period around 3100 BC until it was absorbed, see that keyword absorption, into the Roman Empire in 30 BC. So we are still looking at a timeline where we're in 30 BC before Christ. And if you know anything about specifically the Bible, its many translations, today, the modern day Christianity, I'm using air quotes if you're just listening to this in the background or something. But Christianity itself, I believe, has upwards of around 40,000 different denominations. And this is airing in 2026. So whenever you catch it, just know that that is around the estimated of the different denominations. So all of that to say, if you look, and I had this thing when I was growing up, and I grew up in a fundamentalist Baptist church for a lot of my childhood, and in my formative years. So I studied the Bible a lot. I had to memorize a lot of biblical scriptures. And one of the things I loved looking at were the maps. And I noticed that depending on the Bible, the maps were all very different. And as you know, in the New Testament, one of the key authors was Paul. And Paul had a lot to do with the Roman Empire. So even if you are basing, quote unquote, the beginning of your frame of time, or maybe you've only thought back to those beliefs, back into those Pauline letters and teachings within the Bible, then that's okay. You can see a very common pattern where biblical practices or beliefs in scriptures were actually adjusted to suit and fit the demands and agenda of the Holy Roman Empire. And essentially, you could even just say empire, global empire. And from this is birthed colonization. So The problem, and I'm going to pause real quick for a drink of some water. But the problem is that the sources that we, as modern day humans, are often deriving or even kind of run on autopilot in our subconscious, these sources that we derive our belief systems from and ones that we still uphold within our lives, they exist inside these man-made systems like patriarchy, exploitative capitalism, and racial hierarchies. We could go on about the different pieces that exist in our society. And that's something that we really need to consider and understand how this affects our thinking, how this plays into different lenses of superiority, which is very human nature, that we want to feel certainty. We want to feel confident in that we know something, quote unquote. And that sometimes just doesn't match up with what faith requires and also what the ancient sciences tell us as far as spiritual practices. So today, throughout our time, and I've grounded us in some key anchor details of kind of this beginning, if we really were to glance over our shoulder, and I call it ancestral belief systems because these are all of our origins as humans on Earth, and they can be traced back to these ancient civilizations surrounding the land of Chem. So today we're going to ask three core questions from the ancients, their reason for consecrating their very temples of learning. And those are, what is life? What is intelligence and what is force? And by asking these three questions and kind of keeping these as our guiding questions, I want you to be able to continuously go back to this to examine how you are leading yourself. I do a lot of work with leadership consulting and then also research within the realm of cultural psychology, applied cultural neuroscience, etc. And these three questions could span into so many more questions for us. But today, I want us to consider this particular quote. Is it possible that under the symbols of alchemy and astrology lies concealed a wisdom so abstruse that the mind of this race, the human race, is not yet qualified to conceive its principles? And it's something that is worthy of consideration because I think as humans, we really want to have confidence in certainty. And certainty kind of asserts that we can be confident and 100% sure. We can have this knowing and say, yes, I've got it. I know the one way. And that doesn't leave a whole lot of space for healthy skepticism or what I like to call, as you know, on the Love Learning You podcast, compassionate curiosity. And curiosity positions us to go deeper. And I want to inspire us to each do that within ourselves as we learn a little bit more together today. Okay. So, another quote I wanted to share from the same text, The Secret Teachings of the Ages, a great reference text, is philosophers recognized in the Bible a book of chemical and alchemical formulae. It is essential that this point be kept in mind at all times. Woe to that seeker who accepts as literal the rambling allegories of the alchemists. Such a one can never enter the inner sanctuary of truth. So one of the things that you're going to see me reference here in just a moment is a guide for you all. And I call this framework the inner compass framework or guide. It's derived from some of my research and I'll share that with you all and where these questions come from. But if we cannot enter that inner sanctuary of truth and identify why is it that we believe something, those beliefs are still going to run our lives on autopilot. And we might wake up going, wait, what is this my life? Why, wait, what's happening? Why is this happening? Wait, this doesn't feel true if we haven't examined what's running underneath here. And that often comes from our schooling, our upbringing, our family structure, the culture, which can be geographic, where we're born into, the ethnic and racial categories that we happen to be categorized through man's very short-sighted systems that are designed to control and oppress. But we really then get far away from that inner sanctuary of truth. I notice I have a typo on here too. It's not snacktuary, it's sanctuary. But I want to know now, if you have questions already coming up, make sure you pop them in the comments. If you have thoughts or reactions or arguments, be sure that you're putting them in the comments throughout so that we can continue to interact in our learning together. I consider myself to be on a lifelong learning journey, but one thing I can share with you is that for me, in my own lived experiences and then in my life as a cultural psychology researcher, that I know religion has served three main purposes to humanity: to colonize, control, and shame. And now colonization is a form of control and shame. It's just more institutionalized and organized, in my humble opinion. Let's get into some more map talk though. So I told you all I love to study maps. I have since I was a kid. And we're going to fast forward. I grounded us in a little bit, just a very, very tiny portion of to get your appetite going if you want to research into some different elements throughout time and the ages from this presentation to take and run with your own curious questions then. But I want to now get into a little bit of Kitayama and Cohen's work through the Handbook of Cultural Psychology, which has kind of been my best friend the past 7 or 8 years. And I want to ground us in moving forward to the Enlightenment period. And after all, as it states, the Enlightenment period was also the age of a European expansion to all corners of the world for exploration, trade, and of course, colonization. Many thinkers of the Enlightenment adopted an explicit or implicit social evolutionary thinking. That is, they believe that all human societies and cultures progress through the same stages of evolution over time to higher and more advanced stages. And so this first map is actually land occupation on the continent of Africa. And I want you to consider again, when we even use terms that exist today, such as when you hear someone say the Middle East, well, that's built off of the assumption that Europe is the center of the world and that everything is built around that. That's why it's called the Middle East, because it's off of that. For example, so when you're examining where a belief comes from that you hold, and maybe you do this through studying your own lineages, this is something I suggest to a lot of folks, is start with your own DNA or family stories, whatever you are comfortable with, but looking into yourself and trying to reconnect with that inner compass or establish your own inner compass for the very first time. You know, myself, in my own processes of deconstruction that are going to be ongoing in my life no matter what, and really grasping hold to this continuous improvement process of life, I start with family. And to me, it makes the most sense to study those patterns because it's kind of the thing we have the most control over in our own lives of unpacking and finding the truth. And beyond that, then we can start to branch into where we feel led. Maybe you're led by the spirit. Maybe you are led by a story that your great grandmother tells you or something. I can't determine what that is for you. And that is part of why it is such difficult work to start deconstructing our belief systems and not just go through life accepting what somebody tells us as quote unquote the gospel and never asking curious questions, never wanting to draw nearer and say, I want to understand this aspect of creation. I want to understand this aspect of this particular religious tradition. That requires time, energy, space, effort, intention, and also devotion. And to get there, there are so many avenues. So I'm just offering hopefully some initial tidbits that will help you get intrigued and go down some other paths. So I've left this map up long enough that you can see the influences of where a lot of belief systems stem from, and ultimately that they were used for empire, which also goes back to capitalism as a structure. Okay. The next map, and this is specifically north and into Central America and the Caribbean, so parts of the Americas, and you can see what the cultural areas were originally named and the different tribal lineages, the different native tribes that were on these lands. So you have an entire nation, specifically, I want to speak about United States context, an entire country that not only is founded on a very biased Declaration of Independence that only suits some folks, not everyone, not freedom for all. But that was built upon also thousands, hundreds of thousands of years of ancient practices and peoples and civilizations. And so I do always try to slide in there, as dark as it might sound. The places you travel across the United States are actually, it's a giant burial ground. You can look at instances like the Trail of Tears with the Cherokees and so many other native tribes, but also the Taino, which is part of my lineages. So I'll speak to part of my own lineages, but there's so many stories that if you don't examine who you come from and where you come from, we miss the opportunity to actually heal a lot of those wounds and a lot of those scars, whether your lineages are from the oppressed, the oppressor, both. We all have that as part of our human DNA, part of our ancestral belief systems. And none of us is exempt from examining these parts of who we are if we want to really deeply connect with our inner compass. So, in the same text, the Handbook of Cultural Psychology, I also wanted to point out that Kleinberg in 1980 noted that the Enlightenment period, right, it had this preoccupation with progress. Because remember, in the Enlightenment, they believed that progress was for every person, that this was happening and every person was evolving in their human experience on Earth. But it also made this social evolutionary thinking of natural explanation of human diversity. And here's how: placing the diverse world cultures into different levels of progress and labeling some as primitive savages, or in Rousseau's case, noble savages, and others as advanced and civilized. One of the very intriguing things, and I'm not going to go too much in depth because we will in the modern day society part. I believe that's part 3 or 4 of the series. Um, but I want to point out this way of thinking because I'm actually seeing the same thing pop up in my work in the ed tech space. So you see it with artificial intelligence. People who have money to pay, and I am one of those people who pays for certain platforms to support different projects that I have. I also have an inner conflict about this because I see how that access to knowledge and how things are being filtered through these large language model frameworks, essentially, is what they are derived from. It is really limiting and giving a false sense of like a very disillusioned look for us as humans of like what we think we know compared to what we've actually experienced. And I think that we're in this space of repeating some of those same mistakes of the Enlightenment because people people might confuse, oh wow, I can produce this so fast. Yes, tech is amazing, but they're not seeing how much it's splitting a lot of access in society and how it's even further compounding the miscommunications, the misinformation, and those gaps. And it's causing people to actually repeat some of these same thought processes like, oh, well, they don't know anything because they don't have AI. Well, they don't know about stuff like that. Well, it was the same type of thinking in the Enlightenment with heavy colonization, which was, well, these are primitive savages. Let's rank people. We're all on a journey of progress in the evolutionary human experience, but let's rank people. And this is exactly what we do at our schools. It's what we subconsciously repeat in political systems, in socioeconomic systems, in religious systems, in academic systems. We could go on and on. And we apply this thinking. It's a superiority thinking. It's a narcissistic thinking. And it's one that says, my way is right, my way is better, and my way is above your way. Plain and simple. That's kind of the thinking. And then we could go specifically into frameworks tied to gender, tied to race and white supremacy thinking, etc. all around the world, you're going to see this replicated, and you'll see these fingerprints from through the ages. So the counterpoint to the Enlightenment, though, and we're still in this period of 16, 1700s now, was the Romantic thought. And the counterpoint was traced back to Giambattista Vico, 1668 to 1744, and he was an Italian political philosopher. So in his text, 1725, and then I believe re-released in 1948, The New Science, Vico portrayed human history not as the linear upward movement of progress, but as a cyclical pattern of progress and regress, going through the divine, heroic, and human phases. Now, what this makes me think of actually are the seasons and the three elements of giving life, birth, right? Birth, and then death, and then rebirth. Um, there you go. But that's just what comes to mind for me when I think about, okay, the counterpoint to this, instead of it being this kind of caste system, like we just talked a little bit about from the Enlightenment and how much of that then influences culture still today, our thought processes still today through religion and schooling systems. But then you have the counterpoint, which is we're all on a cycle. We're all on a cycle. Very fascinating. Let me know what you're thinking so far in the comments as we close out here today. I'll let this flash on the screen for you to read really quick. This particular quote is from Werner Gross, and he's a psychotherapist, among other things, that has come out with this body of work in 2025. It's called The Past Gods, How Religions Originated and Where They Have Evolved from the Stone Age to Today in Don't Believe What You Think. And so this was published out of Berlin. And when we think about religious institutions, that's what he is speaking on. And he says, on the one hand, they offer emotional support and assistance, not only in crisis situations, but on the other hand, suicide attacks are also carried out in the name of religion. And under the guise, there is sexual abuse that's flourished and it continues to. And religions have seemed to lose their innocence worldwide. But what exactly are religions? How did they arise? How have they changed over time? And then what are the positive aspects of religions and what are the problematic ones? So a lot of his body of work is actually asking, how did we get to where we are today? And has it always been that way? I tend to think yes, when I've looked at these patterns, like I've shown you the maps for colonization. And we look at the purpose of, for example, gaining empire, and then why those religious traditions and scriptures have shifted, why Paul only shared certain teachings, why things have been censored throughout the Bible and its different translations, and then how that breeds people who are confused. And we all get confused sometimes. So if you're one of those people and you found yourself holding a belief that you go, wait a minute, that's not right. Do not feel stupid. Do not put yourself into a guilt and shame spiral, but rather ask yourself those core questions. You know, what is life? What is intelligence? What is force in my life and how that has looked? And what do I believe about love versus fear? That's really what it comes down to, is looking at how you view love versus fear and how that shows up in your own life. And that will tell you a lot about how you view the great creator, rather God, the universe, source, however you refer, Elohim. That is going to give you an idea of what has that experience been like for you? And is it just because that's what a pastor taught you or a priest taught you? Or is it because you've established your own inner compass of knowing? So, in more of Werner's work, he also denotes that world explaining and meaning making systems that almost always considers themselves the one true, eternal, and ultimate explanation system. They structure diffuse, subjective inner truths in unstructured situations, and they attempt to make the incomprehensible comprehensible. It's why you see a lot of people taking teachings of the Bible in its translations, often mistranslated, and then also applied very literally through legalism and different types of rules, because there isn't necessarily that inner compass that has been brought alive or brought to the surface to shine through. And basic trust symbols and ritual actions are really what gets paid the most attention to. Things like communion, for example. So these are some more questions. Another question to ask yourselves: what are spiritual enlightenment experiences? And what are the ones that you have had for yourself? The origin of all religions is actually fear, emptiness, meaninglessness, and death. Religions are good guides in the dark of the night, but during the day, it's better to rely on your own eyes. And so many of us, we get lost in that dark of the night and the mumbo jumbo of a religious system, or maybe scriptures that we were forced to memorize as a kid, but not really make meaning for ourselves. And that's what finding your own inner compass is all about, is during the day, how are you going to rely on your own eyesight, and where is that eyesight coming from exactly? So, when we look at some of Schuler's work in the text, the Everything World's Religions book, explore the beliefs, traditions, and cultures of ancient and modern religions, it can be asserted with confidence that no one knows exactly how many religions there are, although the best estimate is about 4,200. So we've got roughly around 8.5 billion people in 2026 living on planet Earth and having a human experience. And one religion is certainly not superior to another. And the longing for religion seems built into human nature. The words of Voltaire, 1694 to 1778, still ring true. If God did not exist, it would be necessary to invent him. Mm, lots of food for thought. Okay, let's keep it moving. Oh, and then just to really put us into and close out why the cultural psychology lens, it's an intellectual tradition. And it actually comes from a German word, Volkerpsychologie, literal translation as folk psychology or psychology of a people. And this was around 1823 that we see this word come into use in existence in humanity, in human civilization. And it meant to be a study of Volksgeist. And Geist was spirit, mind, or mentality, with the Volk meaning characterized as a group of people who have common subjective views about themselves, their shared identity, and feeling of belonging together. So when we put the two together, Volkerpsychologie, study of collective mental phenomena or the psychological processes and their products shared by people. This is what I love to study. And if you know and have been around for the continued evolution and journey of Love Learning You, you will know I speak a lot about this because I do have German, Swiss, Taino, Maya, Cherokee, so many elements to my cultural background, and grew up in the Midwest of the United States, birth to Amish Mennonite mother background lineage and Puerto Rican father lineage, with so many different places around the world. So even as a kid, I'm very grateful because though there are painful experiences attached to being parts of religious systems, it's also what has fueled me to really examine, why do humans believe what we believe? And why do we continue to uphold oppressive or harmful beliefs, even if it seems, right? And we're seeing this happening now. So this is kind of the big home run of what we see happening in human civilization, which is we are so attached and so much often programmed and brainwashed to believe what we believe and hold it in our heart and mind and be controlled by it. And we're running these things on autopilot that we're not even looking at a real life situation and saying, this is harming a mother and her child. This is killing an innocent man, whatever those situations are. And then we wonder, how could this person believe this way? I know that definitely has driven me because I witnessed it as a kid growing up, being kept from certain family members, hearing certain family members talked about from whatever different lenses existed, from the different cultural elements that were present in my own home even, and then magnify that in being part of very cult-like and very much cult religious traditions as a kid. So when we come into this place, I don't say that because I think I'm so unique. I think that so many of us as humans have not gone past examining perhaps just our parents and grandparents. And then, even at that, we don't know much about them often. And maybe we get scared to even exercise vulnerability in the questions we ask them. So, part of my goal is to hopefully make that easier for you to ask yourself these questions and also even maybe converse with some loved ones to learn more information about your own bloodlines and your own traditions and where different things came from. Because if we haven't named the different wounds and the different generational patterns, whether that has to do with beliefs or substances or patterns of abuse or just struggles. We all have different struggles in our bloodlines. We all have different things to overcome in our bloodlines and our DNA structures. Then we can only show up in limited ways. And we often then project onto others, well, they should think this way. Well, my way of thinking is the one right way. No, to me, that signals right away we have not done the work then of examining deeper to go, oh, there could be other ways of thinking. Or we are very much attached to wanting to be superior in some way to others because it makes us feel more powerful. That's a very normal human thing. And it has been perpetuated, in my opinion, by these systems because of how they work. And they're designed to make you think, well, if you just fit into this, then you'd have this. And that underneath that is actually greed. And greed can drive us to do a lot of things that are quite selfish and very unloving. And what's underneath that is fear. So here we are again. Will you choose a path of love in your life or fear? And that starts with how we lead ourselves and how we manage our own belief systems and unpack those. So in our learning lab, we have so far discussed some of the following products, so to speak. So if Volcker psychology is the study of collective mental phenomena or the psychological processes and their products. So it's interesting that the term products was used or shared by people. This is how I would define some of the products we've discussed today. Organized religion is a product. Modern society's institutions like education, political, capitalistic, religious systems, those are products of collective shared human thoughts or shared by those people who held the power to try to influence others or to use force to infiltrate others. And then human personality structure, that is actually kind of a segue into part two. We are going to deep dive into human personality structure and how that's actually a product of a lot of our environment and lived experiences and how it shows up running so much of our lives. So it's a very important part two. You'll want to be sure to hit subscribe because we're going to get more into learning about you and what are kind of some of your distress patterns and how you respond when you do learn new information. This is going to help you continue to build up your inner compass. So I want to look at another researcher who had a lot of influence and continues to on my own journey, and that's Ruth Benedict. Her amazing book, Patterns of Culture, came out, first edition was in the 1930s. And these are just a few key quotes from that text that have really driven a lot of my work, but I wanted to share with you all. And that is, I have a lot of typos. Sorry, I was typing fast when I made this presentation. What really binds men together is their culture, the ideas and the standards they have in common. And if you don't know who she is a very well-known anthropologist and was kind of an anomaly for her time because she was not only a woman, but she also wrote a lot of texts and chose to live amongst native tribes across multiple continents as a woman in the 30s with a doctoral level degree and influence in the writing world. So I just felt such a kindred bond to a lot of her work whenever I started studying it years ago. Next, culture with its processes and functions is a subject upon which we need all the enlightenment we can achieve. And there is no direction in which we can seek with greater reward than in the facts of pre-literate societies. So before we were reading, before we were writing extensively or in overcomplicated ways or enmeshing all of these languages together or dealing with misinformation engines that exist through technology. She really looked into pre-literate societies and also working with a lot of native tribes, specifically across Asia and the Americas. So a lot of her work as an anthropologist and researcher speaks to me because of what she accomplished on so many levels, but also just her ability to go and serve and be amidst the people she was learning with. And is so much aligned and very relevant, relatable to my own journey in life so far. And finally, the form that these acts take, we can understand only by understanding first the emotional and intellectual mainsprings of that society. So, anytime you're examining a group of people, and again, we see this very volatile right now, especially in online spaces, digital spaces, where people don't have to show their face in particular, but we are making these broad brush statements about, well, all blank people are this way, all fill in the blank groups are this way. And we're doing a lot of attacking and projecting instead of looking more deeply first within our own inner compass to say, where are the mainsprings of my emotional and intellectual foundation? Where does that spring up from? And we would rather choose to not hold accountability for our own self and our own bloodlines and our own story. Rather, it is much easier to attack somebody who doesn't just quite line up or agree, or we have a bias for why we think that they won't. It's a dangerous space to be in. So, to close this out, over the past 20 years, 40 of my own lived experiences, my research and leadership work have led me to six simple but powerful introspective questions that really do unlock reconnecting and beginning to reconnect with the inner compass with the teams and leadership groups that I have worked with through the years. And I want to share those with you all. Here's what they are built upon: neuroscience insights, cultural psychology, emotional intelligences, as well as the somatic sciences. You can come back, you can pause any parts of this if you want to go back through. Don't want to take too much time and read all of these of every single one, but give you a rich learning experience that, once again, come back, take a picture of the slides that you want to go further with or study some more. And this is just one protocol that I have published now through the years and has come about from a methodological successor called the Culture Pulse 360 Inventory. And this was a lot of the crux of my doctoral, my PhD work. And it's designed to promote shared leadership, healthy systems of accountability, and teacher voice in the strategic planning process and adoption of K-12 distributive leadership models. Now, all of that to say, that inventory it was very specifically designed to take reflection on a journey through inner introspection. So basically examining your own inner worlds to understand how you're showing up in your role as an educator in your school district. And from that, I can see then a pattern of not only organizational, but the individual beliefs across schools within a district, the beliefs, the values, the culture, essentially, the symbols, what is important, but why do beliefs matter to me so much? Why is it important for me to ask teachers those questions? Because if you don't know what you believe, or you do, and we have a foundation to understand collectively these are the consistent beliefs, then we understand why we're getting the outcomes we're getting a little bit better, because we collectively have a pattern of believing XYZ about students or about this student group. So if I haven't then been asked the tough questions about, do I have a colleague that I can go to that I trust, for example, I can't really then collaborate well if I don't have trust as a foundation. So our beliefs, our values, our norms, our language that we use when we speak with one another, things like the love languages, all of these are part of what I consider a cultural ecosystem of trying to unpack our inner compass. So birthed from that, and then seeing the common patterns, and then facilitating dialogues with C-suite level leaders as well as new teachers, a number of different groups of quote unquote types of roles, levels of leadership roles, however you want to say that. But this is then derived from seeing those patterns and what it takes to get people to open up. And what came out of it is the Inner Compass Introspective Practices Protocol. You can find more research about this on introspectiveprofile.com. And when you go download the 6 questions to start journaling and asking yourself, each of the 1 questions alone can take lots of avenues of reflection and journaling and just even thought, and can take years to unpack. There are many questions that I'm continually going back to these 6 questions in my own journey. And on that same guide, a part of it is seen right here. And I have a SWOT, which is really just an analysis protocol to look at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. But this time, the SWOT protocol is being applied to those introspective guide questions, those inner compass guide questions. And once you've answered some of those questions, then you can start to see, oh, this is a strength for me. I have a good knowing of this within myself. My inner compass is sharp with this aspect. But then we can also go, ooh, oh, okay, I'm now understanding and unpacking where that type of thinking came from. And that's a weakness. That's a limitation for me. It doesn't let me see opportunities or threats very well. And then further, I can, get into how this pans out for your brain and your processing. So that is just another aspect. You won't just get the 6 questions. You will then also get this as a reference of just to reference and say, how do I build on my core competency that I feel strong about, and not make it about beating yourself up or going, oh my goodness, I can't believe I thought that about this. That's okay. That another we'll talk a little bit about that with personality in some of the other sessions here, but the guilt and shame spirals are actually what keep us stuck a lot. It's not necessarily because we aren't ready to let go of a harmful belief. It's because we feel ashamed about it, and then we're still hanging on to it some way in our psyche. Okay, so two truths that can be true at once. The existing religious systems in our world often reward our overwork. And basically, then when we're overworked, we don't have the time, energy, and space to have introspection, nor to have it really be accurate, because a lot of our time and energy is used up by an external source and is being guided by external sources, not our own inner compass. But introspection and realignment with your inner compass is actually a way to reclaim agency and sovereignty in your own life, even amidst the existing oppressive systems that we all are encountering still in our world. So, finally, leadership to me isn't only about how we guide others, it's about whether we know how to listen to ourselves first, and then to be willing to even put in the time, energy, and space to cry the tears that need to be cried, shout the anger out and the rage that needs to be released in order for us to have more clarity and see our lives accurately through a lens of love more consistently, while also holding space and recognizing the fears without letting them overtake us. So going back to 2 ways, are you being driven, is your belief system being driven by love or by fear? And then where did those things come from? Gave a little bit of a historical viewpoint, very minimal along the way, some timeline key points. And there's so many great teachers. I encourage you to choose one of these rabbit trails or a point or of inspiration that gave you something to chew on, and look up practitioners, look up more videos on it, because that's how we learn and grow. We get curious, and also make sure it's compassionate curiosity towards ourselves and towards others. This has been part 1 of our 4-part series on beliefs, our summer 2026 series on belief systems, when enlightenment becomes colonization, examining ancestral belief systems. And this part 1 kicks off our 4-part series. And as a reminder, here are the other parts as they will be released in the coming weeks over the next month. I'm really excited to get into more learning with you all, and I'm grateful that you're here as we continue to grow and evolve. Remember, you can listen to the Love Learning You podcast on any platforms where you get podcasts. We have listeners and subscribers in over 55 countries. Thank you all. I am so just grateful. I'm seeing more and more positive reviews on the different platforms too. And finally, just a note, these learning series, this is a leadership learning lab series. These are only available here on YouTube right now. Our other podcasts, we have episodes, we have featured voices, all of that stuff, and we will reconvene here in the next month with some new guest interviews as well as my solo episodes. But this is a special learning lab series, so the workshops are a tad longer, more research based, etc. Finally, you've received it. You've seen the website all the way through. Please go download the Inner Compass Personal Introspection Guide. Check out those 6 questions that are informed by years and years of research, not just by me, but of so many researchers that have gone before me that I have pulled information and studies from, as well as combining with my own lived experiences. It's been so wonderful to be in space with you all. This has been examining our ancestral belief systems in our 4-part series together. And I will see you all in part 2.